Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us for the third Consumer Protection Research Roundtable. So today we'll be having a presentation from Bradley Hughes, who's a PhD candidate at the Department of Psychology here at the University of Oregon. And he will be speaking about his research along with Professor Sanjay Srivastava called "Whose Consumer Complaints Are Taken Seriously? The Content and Consequences of Socioeconomic Stereotyping for Oregon Consumers."
Excellent. Thank you, Liz. Hi, everyone. My name is Bradley Hughes. Thanks for coming today. I am a doctoral candidate in the psychology department, and I'm working with Sanjay Srivastava, my collaborator on this grant. I'm very excited to talk to you today about our project and grateful that our work was funded through this grant. In this research, we aim to understand the consequences of consumers' socioeconomic status on the response to their consumer complaints. Daily life for Oregonians are filled with consumer experiences. On any given day, consumers may buy a cup of coffee, groceries for their family, a few plants for their garden, or order a product from an online retailer or one they found in a social media ad. An important question for these consumers is, what do they do when they have a negative consumer experience? They might talk to the seller to see if they can make things right. They might talk to someone in a state agency that regulates the product or service. Or another really important context is they might talk to other consumers to seek their advice and support. In each of these situations, the consumer is telling their story of their experience to a stranger, and a lot may depend on whether they're believed or not. People vary in their position in the social and economic hierarchy of society, and evidence from studies conducted in the lab points towards SES as one factor that may influence whether or not people's consumer experiences are judged to be credible. For consumers with lower SES, the negative effects of being disbelieved may be especially hard, as they are less able to financially absorb a loss and move on. So how can socioeconomic status impact judgments about consumer complaints? Well, SES is often measured by how much income, education, and occupational prestige individuals have. We can consider these as indicators of an individual's actual SES. When interacting with others, we hypothesize that SES is expressed through cues, and people pick up on the SES of those they are interacting with, what we will call perceived SES. Perceived SES then leads to people applying SES-based stereotypes, such as people who are higher in SES being more competent than those who have lower SES. These SES-based stereotypes may then influence judgments about the credibility of consumer complaints. For example, if I share with you that something I ordered online was delivered to the wrong house, if you perceive me to be low in SES, you may conclude that it was either my fault, as I incompetently entered the wrong address, or you may think that I was just trying to get something for free. In either case, you discount my complaint, judging it as not very credible. In cases where this interaction is between a store employee and a consumer trying to return an item, these judgments have a direct financial impact. In cases where the conversation is between two consumers, judgments of lack of credibility might lead to people feeling not believed or not receiving the support they are seeking. The primary aim of this work is to test the paths in this model and answer the following questions. Do strangers detect the SES of others? Past studies and controlled laboratory experiments show that people can detect SES from faces and speech. We are going to see if people can detect SES during initial social interactions. We also want to know, what is the content of SES-based stereotypes? Past research suggests that competence is an important domain of SES-based stereotypes, but this work is primarily comprised of judgments of social categories such as rich or poor, and not of individuals. We'll estimate the interpersonal stereotypes of SES across a wider array of domains and in perceptions formed during social interactions. Finally, a very exciting part of this work is linking these effects to real-world outcomes by answering the question, does SES or SES-based stereotypes affect judgments of consumer complaints? Previous work in the lab has shown an association between SES of a face or a voice and hypothetical hiring decisions, but little work has examined the real-world consequences of SES in actual interactions between real people. An important goal of this research was to move beyond these limitations of past laboratory work and study these phenomena in actual interactions between people from diverse socioeconomic backgrounds. But recruiting a community sample of 300 people and trying to schedule them to come in the lab in groups of 6 presented a pretty big logistic challenge and would, even without the pandemic, take several years to complete. These logistic challenges have limited the use of round-robin designs, which use the multiple ratings made of and by each participant to make precise estimates of interpersonal effects. In fact, up until now, nobody has ever conducted a round-robin study with a community sample of strangers. To address this challenge, I developed a computer-mediated online round-robin, or CMOR for short. CMOR leverages the widespread availability of personal computers, video conferencing software, and the internet to facilitate interactions between participants in virtual rooms and then collect their impressions of one another. In a CMOR study, participants can be recruited online and participate from anywhere in the world as long as they have a computer and an internet connection. In this study, we recruit groups of 4 to 6 participants to join the session at the same time and take part in a series of interactions with other participants. Just to give you an idea of what it takes to run one of these sessions, for each 6-person CMOR session, there are 3 virtual rooms hosting interactions in each round, which means there are a total of 45 dyadic interactions. During each session, we have 3 research assistants working who each run and monitor a virtual room. So who are the participants in our study? We were recruiting 300 participants through Prolific, an online participant recruitment tool. It is a US national sample, and you can see here on the map that our participants come from across the US. We do not have data on the demographics of our sample yet, but an advantage of using Prolific is that participants do come from a diverse socioeconomic backgrounds. So you might wonder what it's like to be a participant in a CMOR study. So imagine you are a participant. In a survey prior to the interactive session, you provide information about your Big 5 personality traits and other characteristics, your SES, and then write a short story about a negative experience you've had as a consumer. Then at a scheduled time, you follow a link to join the interactive part of the study. In this part, you enter a virtual room and are greeted by a research assistant and joined by another participant. The research assistant, or RA, provides some instructions about the interaction. In this study, each person takes about a minute to describe their consumer experience, and the remaining time is used discussing them. The RA also lets you know that you'll be interacting with and providing impressions of up to 5 other participants. After the first interaction, here Kyle is interacting with Lisa, the participants are instructed to exit the room and provide judgments about the personality and SES of their interaction partner. They also rate how much they believe the person's story and whether or not they would patronize the business or tell others to avoid it. After providing these responses, the participants enter another virtual room and interact with a different participant and then rate them, and then interact and rate for 5 rounds. So at the end, participants have interacted with and judged 5 other people. The interactions have been better than we even hoped. Most people are engaged in the task and enjoy talking about their experiences with others. Although there have been some technical challenges, overall the participants are able to navigate through the study and they appear comfortable chatting with other participants in the virtual rooms. To give you an idea of what happens during these interactions, here are clips from a few of the interactions in which both participants consented to us showing during presentations. Okay, so that gives you kind of an idea of how these interactions go, and people tend to share their story, some of them quickly and some of them more lengthy, and then they discuss at the end. Let's return to the question now. How does SES impact these interactions? Well, if we consider the dyadic interaction between Dude and Mackenzie, and the impressions Dude formed of Mackenzie, and these are the names they provided, by the way. We think that Dude will detect Mackenzie's SES through her expression of SES cues. He then will apply SES-based stereotypes, which influence his impressions of her other personality characteristics, such as whether she is extroverted or competent. We hypothesize that his impressions of her SES and the subsequently applied stereotypes will influence how credible he finds Mackenzie's complaint. It's important to note that we are not studying these individual interactions, but we'll use the data collected from the 300 participants, which will include about 750 dyadic interactions like the ones you just saw, to estimate aggregated effects. An important question is, what do we expect to find? Are impressions of SES accurate? And in what domains are they associated with SES-based stereotypes? Well, we don't have results yet, but evidence from an initial Seymour study with undergraduates may provide some insight. The initial Seymour study with an undergraduate sample, with an undergraduate sample, we found that impressions of SES were relatively accurate. We also found that undergraduate students applied SES-based stereotypes in the domains of competence, extroversion, neuroticism, and openness. And the present work will determine if these specific stereotypes are unique to impressions formed among college students, or if there are different interpersonal stereotypes of SES in a more diverse population. To give you an idea of where we are in this study, we've so far collected data from 147 participants who have participated in 26 groups. These participants have all made it a point to let us know, I shouldn't say all of them, but a lot of these participants have made a point to let us know how much they enjoyed participating. The next steps for this work are finishing data collection and conducting our planned analysis. Further, we will code and use the videos to answer questions about what cues are used to inform impressions of SES, and we will also use some natural language processing analyses to examine the association between SES, personality, and the content of people's consumer complaints. We believe there are important implications of SES influencing judgments about consumer complaints. Across the interaction so far, there are differences in whether people's complaints were taken seriously and whether they felt the complaint was handled adequately by the company. If these vary as a function of SES, it would mean that people who can least afford to have an unsatisfactory outcome tend to have them more often, presenting yet another disadvantage for lower SES consumers. It would also support the hypothesis that SES and SES-based stereotypes impact other social judgments and decisions. Finally, it would suggest that companies should standardize how they respond to complaints or identify other ways to remove subjective judgments from the process of determining responses to consumer complaints.